I didn't make a sound, just handed him the envelope with a smile. He had no idea what was coming. My name is Richard Brennan, and I'm 67 years old. For 43 years, I worked as a plant supervisor at a manufacturing facility in Saskatoon. My wife, Margaret, and I built a good life together. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We had a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, 2 cars that ran well, and enough saved up for a retirement we'd spent decades planning. Margaret passed away 3 years ago, lung cancer. It happened fast, 6 months from diagnosis to the end. Those last weeks, I barely left her side. Our son, Darren, visited twice. Once when we first got the news, and once for the funeral. Both times, he stayed less than 48 hours. After Margaret died, the house felt too big, too quiet. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and forget she was gone, reach across the bed expecting to feel her warmth. The silence would hit me all over again. Darren started calling more often after that. At first, I was grateful. We'd never been particularly close. He'd moved to Vancouver for work right after university, and only came back for holidays. But after Margaret died, he called every week, sometimes twice a week. We'd talk about his job in tech, about his girlfriend Simone, about the weather, small things. It felt good to hear his voice. About 8 months after the funeral, Darren mentioned he was working on something big, a startup. He and some colleagues had developed some kind of software platform. I never fully understood the technical details. He talked about investors, about growth potential, about how this could change everything. His voice had this energy I hadn't heard in years. It reminded me of when he was younger, when he'd get excited about a new hobby or project. He asked if I'd be interested in investing. Not a lot, he said. Just something to help them get through the next phase. They were so close to securing major funding, but they needed a bridge loan to keep operations running. I was hesitant. I didn't know anything about tech startups or venture capital. My retirement savings were carefully planned enough to cover my expenses for the next 20 years, maybe longer if I was frugal. But Darren assured me it was safe. He had a business plan, projections, everything. And he was my son, the only family I had left. I thought about Margaret. She'd always wanted Darren to succeed, always believed in him, even when his choices seemed risky. What would she say about me refusing to help our son when he needed it? I transferred $45,000 to the business account he provided. It was roughly a quarter of my savings. Darren was thrilled. He sent me a long email thanking me, promising he'd pay me back with interest within 6 months. He included documents, incorporation papers, financial statements, a shareholder agreement making me a small equity holder. It all looked legitimate. For the first few months, everything seemed fine. Darren sent regular updates. The company was hitting milestones, meeting with potential clients, getting closer to that big funding round. He sounded confident, successful. Then the updates became less frequent. Once a month instead of once a week, then every few months. When I called to ask about the investment, Darren said everything was on track, just taking longer than expected. These things always did. I shouldn't worry. I tried not to worry. I trusted him. About 18 months after my initial investment, Darren called with another opportunity. The company was right on the verge of a major breakthrough. They had a signed term sheet with a VC firm, a guaranteed investment of $2 million. But they needed just a bit more to finalize everything. Another $30,000 would secure my position and ensure I'd be part of the big payout when the deal closed. I hesitated longer this time. $30,000 was a significant chunk of what I had left. But Darren emphasized how close they were. This was it, the finish line. And the term sheet was real. He'd email me a copy. The document he sent looked professional. Lots of legal language, official letterhead from a Vancouver investment firm. I didn't understand most of it, but it seemed real. I made the transfer. Another $30,000 gone from my savings account. That's when things started to feel wrong. The promised email updates stopped completely. Darren's calls became sporadic. When I managed to reach him, he always seemed distracted, in a hurry. The deal was complicated, he'd say. Lots of legal stuff to sort through. Be patient. I was patient. For months. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in March. I was having coffee when my phone rang. Unknown number. Usually I don't answer those, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Trevor Hoffman, a private investigator. He was calling because my name had come up in an investigation he was conducting. Could we meet? My stomach dropped. I agreed to meet him that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. Trevor was younger than I expected, maybe 45, with tired eyes and a weathered face. He laid out a folder on the table between us. Inside were documents, photographs, bank statements. He explained that he'd been hired by another investor, a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd given money to the same company Darren was supposedly running. Except there was no company. Not really. Oh, there was an incorporation certificate, a website, some fancy documents. But there was no actual product, no real business, no investors. The office address listed on the paperwork was a mail forwarding service. The supposed VC firm on the term sheet didn't exist. Their website was a fake, registered only 6 months ago. Darren had been taking money from multiple investors, at least 7 that Trevor had identified, and using it to fund his lifestyle. Expensive apartment in downtown Vancouver, regular trips to Vegas and Mexico, a new Tesla. All of it paid for with money from people who thought they were investing in a legitimate business. My son was running a scam, and I was one of his victims. Trevor showed me bank records he'd obtained through his investigation. Transfers from my account matched up with luxury purchases and casino withdrawals. That $45,000 I'd sent, gone within 3 months. The $30,000 lasted 6 weeks. I sat there in that coffee shop, staring at the evidence, and felt something inside me break. This wasn't a failed business. This wasn't bad luck or poor planning. This was deliberate, calculated. My own son had lied to me, exploited my trust, and stolen money I'd spent 4 decades earning. When I found my voice, I asked Trevor what happened next. He said Patricia was planning to file a police report and was encouraging other victims to do the same. He gave me contact information for a detective in the Vancouver fraud unit. I drove home in a daze, sat in my living room for hours, just staring at the walls. I thought about Margaret, about what she'd say if she knew. I thought about all those phone calls from Darren after she died, how grateful I'd been for his attention, how stupid I'd been. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying conversations in my head, looking for signs I'd missed. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind? By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to just file a police report and hope for the best. I was going to make sure Darren faced consequences. Real consequences. I called Trevor back and asked if he could do more digging. I wanted everything, every transaction, every victim, every lie. I'd pay whatever it cost. Trevor seemed surprised but agreed. Over the next 3 months, I became obsessive. Trevor would send me reports, and I'd spend hours poring over them, taking notes, building a timeline. I contacted the other victims myself. Patricia, a retired school teacher who'd lost $38,000. James, a contractor who'd given $60,000. Sarah, a nurse who'd invested her entire maternity leave savings $22,000. We shared stories. The patterns were always the same. Darren had targeted people who knew him, trusted him, cared about him. Patricia was his girlfriend's mother. James was a former colleague. Sarah was an ex-girlfriend from university he'd stayed friendly with. And me, his own father. Each person had gotten the same pitch, the same fake documents, the same excuses when money ran out. He'd played on our emotions, our relationships, our desire to believe in him. I contacted a lawyer. She reviewed everything and said we had a strong case for fraud charges, but warned me that prosecutions could take years and recovery of funds was unlikely. Darren had spent most of the money. Even if convicted, he probably couldn't pay us back. I didn't care about the money anymore. I cared about justice. The detective assigned to the case, Constable Andrea Wallace, was thorough but realistic. She explained that financial fraud cases were difficult. Darren could claim he genuinely believed the business would succeed, that losses were just part of entrepreneurship. Without proof of criminal intent, charges might not stick. But I had an idea. Darren's 35th birthday was coming up in July. For the past few years, he'd made a big deal about his birthdays, throwing parties, posting photos on social media, making sure everyone knew. This year would be no different. I called him for the first time in months, kept my voice light, casual, said I knew we'd been out of touch, but I'd been thinking about him and wanted to do something special for his birthday. Maybe I could come out to Vancouver, take him to dinner? Darren sounded surprised but pleased. Sure, Dad, that would be great. Over the next few weeks, I played the role perfectly. The proud father who didn't suspect anything. I asked about his business, how were things going. He gave vague, optimistic answers. I didn't push. I let him think I was still the same gullible fool who'd handed over $75,000 without asking hard questions. I booked a flight to Vancouver, found a modest hotel near his apartment, told Constable Wallace my plan. She was skeptical but agreed to coordinate. The night before his birthday, Darren called to finalize dinner plans. He suggested an expensive restaurant in Yaletown. Of course he did. I agreed. I spent that night rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd act. I had to make this convincing. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place Darren loved. Sleek, modern, full of young professionals talking too loudly about their jobs and their investments. He arrived 15 minutes late, wearing an expensive suit I'm sure I'd paid for. We made small talk. He asked about Saskatoon, about the house, about my health. I asked about his work. He launched into another pitch. The company was doing amazing now. They'd just signed a huge client. Everything was coming together. I nodded along, playing my part. After dinner, we walked to a nearby bar where some of his friends were gathering for birthday drinks. About 20 people, mostly his age, all successful-looking and confident. I felt out of place, but I stayed, smiled, shook hands, played the proud dad. Around 9 o'clock, Darren called for everyone's attention. He wanted to say a few words, thank everyone for coming. He talked about how grateful he was for his friends, for their support, for believing in his vision. Then he looked at me. I also want to thank my dad for being here tonight. I know it's not easy for him to travel anymore, but he made the trip all the way from Saskatchewan to celebrate with me. Dad, you've always believed in me, even when things were tough. You've supported me in ways I can't even describe. So thank you. People applauded. Someone handed me a drink. I felt sick. That's when I stood up, pulled the envelope from my jacket pocket. Darren, I have something for you. A birthday gift. His face lit up. He crossed the room, took the envelope. Everyone was watching, smiling. Someone had a phone out, recording. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I watched his expression change. The smile froze, then faltered. His eyes scanned the page once, twice. The color drained from his face. It was a summons, a court notice informing him that he was being charged with 7 counts of fraud. The hearing date was listed, instructions for what he needed to do next. The room went silent. One of his friends asked what it was. Darren couldn't speak. I could. What Darren's holding is notification that he's being charged with fraud. Over the past 2 years, he's stolen approximately $400,000 from 7 people, including me. The company he's been telling you about doesn't exist. The investments he's collected have been spent on his lifestyle. This apartment, his car, vacations, nights out like this one. Someone gasped. Several people pulled out their phones. Darren was shaking his head, stammering something about a misunderstanding. I continued. I spent $75,000 on his fake business. Money I'd saved for retirement. Money my late wife and I had set aside for our future. He lied to me repeatedly, sent me fraudulent documents, and spent my savings on luxury items while I rationed groceries. Darren tried to interrupt. Dad, this isn't you don't understand. I understand perfectly. My voice was steady, cold. You're a thief, and not just any thief. You stole from your own father while his wife's body was barely cold in the ground. The room erupted. People were yelling questions at Darren, backing away from him. His girlfriend Simone, the one I'd heard so much about, was crying. Someone demanded to know if they'd invested too. Darren's eyes met mine. In them, I saw panic, fear, and something else, a desperate calculation, like he was trying to figure out if he could still talk his way out of this. He couldn't. That's when Constable Wallace walked in with 2 uniformed officers. She'd been waiting outside, ready to make the arrest once I'd served the summons. They read Darren his rights, put him in handcuffs. Several people were filming now, someone live streaming. By morning, the video would have thousands of views, my son's humiliation broadcast across social media. As they led him away, he looked back at me. Dad, please, we can fix this. Don't do this. I didn't respond. Just watched them take him out of the bar. Simone approached me, mascara running down her face. How could you? He's your son. I met her eyes. He stopped being my son when he decided I was just another mark. The trial took 11 months. Darren pleaded not guilty, claimed he genuinely believed the business would succeed. His lawyer painted him as an optimistic entrepreneur who'd made mistakes, not a criminal. But the evidence was overwhelming. Trevor's investigation had documented everything: the fake office, the fraudulent term sheet, the casino transactions, and luxury purchases made days after receiving investment funds. Text messages between Darren and a friend where he'd joked about old people being easy targets. The prosecutor called each victim to testify. Patricia, who'd had to delay her retirement. James, who'd had to take out a second mortgage. Sarah, who'd lost her savings for her daughter's education. Then it was my turn. I sat in that witness stand and told the jury everything. How Darren had increased contact after his mother died. How he'd exploited my grief and loneliness. How he'd spent Margaret's memory as currency to steal from me. Darren's lawyer tried to suggest I'd known the risks, that this was just a business deal gone wrong. I shut that down immediately. This wasn't a business deal. This was a con. My son created fake documents, fake companies, and fake promises specifically designed to trick people into giving him money he never intended to repay. He didn't fail. He stole. There's a difference. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Found him guilty on all 7 counts. Sentencing came 2 months later. The judge was harsh. She talked about breach of trust, about targeting vulnerable people, about the particular cruelty of defrauding family members. She sentenced Darren to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years probation. He was also ordered to pay restitution, though everyone knew we'd never see that money. I sat in the courtroom gallery and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just emptiness. After the sentencing, several people approached me. Patricia hugged me, thanked me for pushing forward with the case. James shook my hand. A journalist asked for a comment. I declined. What was there to say? I flew back to Saskatoon the next day. The house was exactly as I'd left it. Too quiet, too big. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and thought about everything that had happened. People have asked me if I regret it, if I wish I'd handled it differently, maybe tried to work things out privately, given Darren another chance. I don't. What he did wasn't just theft. It was betrayal of the deepest kind. He looked at his grieving father and saw an opportunity. He took advantage of my love, my trust, my loneliness. That's not something you forgive. That's not something you work through over family counseling sessions. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt, because it does. Every single day. I think about the son I raised, the boy who used to build Lego spaceships on our living room floor, who'd come running when Margaret called him for dinner. I wonder when that person disappeared, or if he ever really existed. I think about Margaret, and I'm grateful she didn't live to see this. It would have destroyed her. The house is paid off. I have enough savings left to live modestly for another 15 years, maybe 20 if I'm careful. I volunteer at the local community center twice a week, teaching woodworking to teenagers. It gives me something to do, a reason to get up in the morning. I haven't spoken to Darren since the trial. He wrote me one letter from prison, about 8 months into his sentence. I didn't open it, just put it through the shredder and went about my day. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. And some gifts like that envelope at his birthday party are exactly what the recipient deserves, whether they want them or not. If you're reading this and you've ever been approached by a family member with an investment opportunity that sounds too good to be true, listen to your instincts. Ask questions. Demand documentation. Verify everything independently. Don't let love or loyalty cloud your judgment. And if you discover you've been defrauded, don't stay silent. Don't protect the person who hurt you just because they're family. File police reports. Talk to lawyers. Connect with other victims. Hold them accountable. Trust is earned. When someone violates that trust, especially family, they deserve to face the consequences. Not because you're cruel or vengeful, but because allowing them to escape accountability only enables them to hurt more people. I learned that lesson at 67 years old. I hope you can learn it earlier and cheaper than I did. The last thing I'll say is this. Forgiveness is complex, and everyone's situation is different. But forgiveness doesn't mean accepting continued harm. It doesn't mean pretending betrayal didn't happen. And it certainly doesn't mean protecting someone from the natural consequences of their criminal actions. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, for other potential victims, and even for the person who wronged you, is to say no. To draw a line. To let justice run its course. That's not the ending I wanted. I wanted a son I could be proud of. I wanted to spend my retirement years watching him build a real business, maybe have grandchildren, create the kind of family life Margaret and I had dreamed about. But that's not the ending I got. Instead, I got a courtroom, a prison sentence, an empty house, and a shredded letter. But I also got something else. My dignity, my self-respect, the knowledge that when I was wronged, I didn't just accept it. I fought back. I protected others. I stood up. Sometimes that has to be enough.